Good morning. After months of wrangling and hundreds of hours of talks, Rishi Sunak is expected to shake hands on a deal to cut red tape and make trade easier across the Irish Sea. He meets EU President Ursula von der Leyen in Windsor at lunchtime to finalise the agreement over the Northern Ireland Protocol. But he could face a major challenge to sell the deal to sceptical Ulster Unionists and Tory backbenchers. Let's get more, should we? Tamara is standing by in Berkshire. Joe Pike is outside Stormont in Belfast. Tamara, to you, first of all, if I may. Why are you there?
Morning, Kate. Well, this is the location here in Berkshire where Rishi Sunak will be the EU Commission boss, Ursula von der Leyen, who is flying over to the UK today to, we expect, sign off the Brexit deal that they have spent many weeks and hundreds of hours negotiating. If you thought Brexit had already been done, well, this looks to be the final piece of the puzzle. How post-Brexit trade arrangements apply in Northern Ireland and fixing some of the many problems that have arisen from the original Northern Ireland deal signed off by Boris Johnson at the end of 2020. This is what about a year and a half of intense negotiations have led up to, and Rishi Sunak's allies say he's managed to secure concessions from the EU, although we haven't seen the detail of what they will agree today that his predecessors could not. Now, we expect they will announce the details of this agreement at a press conference later this afternoon, a short way from here, and take some questions before the Prime Minister, if all goes to plan, goes to Parliament to announce the deal later tonight. This is all to do with making it easier to trade between Great Britain and Northern Ireland to minimise checks, but also solve some of the political issues, the feeling that Northern Ireland does not, in the view of many who live there, have enough of a say over the EU rules which apply there. But the key question is not just the agreement today, that could be the easy bit, it's the reaction among the Conservative Party and among its key figures such as Boris Johnson, and also, of course, crucially, the reaction in Northern Ireland, because the Prime Minister has said that he would like to see power sharing get back up and running, and that requires all parties to accept what he agrees here today.
Joe, the DUP, all important in this. They've got their 7 points, their 7 tests, and just looking at some of them, no border in the Irish Sea, no checks on goods between GB and Northern Ireland. How are they going to get this over the line?
Well, I think, Kay, perhaps, as Tamara intimated, the easy bit was getting the deal, the difficult bit was selling it. And even though this deal could be an improvement, it certainly doesn't mean that the DUP will back it and return to power sharing here at Stormont. I think it's worth noting that their response may not be immediate, it may not be today, it may not even be this week. They'll want to look at the legal text, and perhaps they'll also want to look at the implementation. They want to see how this works in practice. There are short-term and long-term considerations. Of course, short-term electoral considerations, local elections coming up here in Northern Ireland, possibly a Stormont election this year. Will the DUP backing of this deal increase or decrease their support, especially with a more hardline unionist party, the TUV, in the background potentially benefiting? But the long-term perspective is the decades ahead. The big concern of many unionists, the DUP being the largest unionist party here at Stormont, is that we will see, if EU law applies in Northern Ireland, a divergence, and a divergence which could be pretty damaging for the union, permanently damaging for the union, and would see potentially Northern Ireland move further and further away from the rest of Great Britain. Now, of course, it's not just the DUP's response we'll be looking at today. Of course, many other parties across the political spectrum. But Kay, they don't have a veto over this deal. They do have a veto, though, here at Stormont, and power sharing will not start again unless they approve it. And of course, there has not been power sharing here for more than a year. We had elections last May, and still none of those MLAs have sat in Parliament. And of course, we don't have a First Minister or Deputy First Minister.
OK, for now, thank you both. Well, here's what some of the papers are saying about today's talks. Let's start with The Times, quoting Rishi Sunak, who says he's won big concessions from the EU. The Telegraph says the Tory revolt is brewing as the EU chief flies in to seal the Brexit deal. And what does the Daily Mail say? Stay tuned and find out a little bit more. Meantime, supermarket bosses have been called in to a meeting with Food Minister Mark Spencer, who'll ask them to explain fruit and veg shortages and what they're doing to stock empty shelves. Well, let's find out in more detail. Saba standing by for us this morning. Hello to you, Saba. So talk us through what the government wants to hear from the supermarket bosses.
Good morning, Kay. Well, empty shelves and customer limits in supermarkets like this one could be in place for at least up to a month. Now, that's according to George Eustice, the former Environment Secretary. He said yesterday, or rather pointed yesterday, that particular international issues are affecting us on a domestic level here in the UK. He said that the war in Ukraine, as we know, has significantly impacted heating bills, energy costs significantly risen, and as a result, less people are willing to heat their greenhouses, which in turn is impacting production. And also what we're seeing is travel issues and also cold weather in Morocco and Spain also affecting the level of imports coming in to the United Kingdom. Now, Mr. Eustice did say that this is something that the UK government couldn't really have done much to prevent from occurring. But it was, in fact, the National Union of Farmers that said just last week that they have been warning the government about this scenario taking place this past year, and that the UK has hit a tipping point. Now, as you say, the government are later meeting with representatives from the major supermarket brands later today to talk about what they can do to fix the current problem that we are seeing and how to prevent it again from happening in the future. But more details as the day goes on, Kay.
OK, thank you. Other news, Ofgem expected to announce this morning that it will drop its cap on the amount energy suppliers are able to charge households. But analysts believe bills will still rise by an average of £500. Check this chart out. It shows how wholesale gas prices spiked after the invasion of Ukraine, but prices have recently come down. As a result, it's expected that Ofgem will also reduce the energy price cap to an estimated £3,295. It's currently £4,270. Despite this, bills are still expected to rise by 20% because the government's energy price guarantee, which caps household bills at £2,500 annually, will rise to £3,000. The Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, is facing calls from opposition parties to keep the support at the current level in his spring budget next month. Let's take a look at some of today's other headlines for you. In the meantime, police have been granted more time to question a suspect in the shooting of an off-duty police officer in Northern Ireland. Detective Chief Inspector John Caldwell remains in a critical condition after the suspected terror attack in Omagh on Wednesday. So far, 6 men have been arrested. The age at which people can marry in the UK goes up today from 16 to 18. The law also covers civil partnerships, and parental consent will make no difference. Campaigners have long argued that allowing under 18s to marry left some young people vulnerable to forced marriages. The Australian firm Recharge Industries has completed its takeover of British Volt. The collapsed start-up company had ambitions of building a nearly £4 billion battery plant outside Blyth in the northeast, but couldn't get enough funding. Its new owners say the plant may still be built one day. Italian authorities say they fear more than 100 people may have died after a boat carrying migrants sank off the country's southern coast. The bodies of 59 people, including 12 children, have been found so far. They travelled from Turkey with passengers from Afghanistan, Pakistan and Somalia. The boat sank off the eastern coast of Calabria in southern Italy. The Italian Coast Guard says dozens of bodies washed up on the shore in a seaside resort just south of the coastal town of Crotone. Our Europe correspondent Siobhan Robbins has more for us now. Siobhan, such a heartbreaking story, this.
Really terrible scenes yesterday off the coast of eastern Italy. We saw the boat which these people had been travelling in broken up on the shore. Fears now, as you say, at least 100 people have died. The UN in a joint statement said many of those on board included whole families, children who had disappeared. You can imagine just how terrible it was going into the water at night. And some of the survivors have been taken not just for health checks, but also for psychological care, because the trauma that they're feeling is exceptional. And police in Italy have said that they are talking to one alleged smuggler, and last night said they were looking for another 3 who are allegedly involved in this operation. Now, Italy's far-right Prime Minister, who was voted in last year partly on a pledge to curb migration to Italy, has expressed her deep sorrow and said that they will continue to crack down on illegal migration and trafficking. But this scene has reopened the discussions around migration, particularly following a discussion and decision last week by MPs in Italy to tighten rules around rescues, meaning that boats that go into the Mediterranean to try and save people aren't allowed to hang around and carry out multiple rescues. They have to get a port and move immediately to it. Some people saying that actually that will mean that more people in the Mediterranean die, and we already know that that is one of the most dangerous routes on the planet.
OK, for now, Siobhan, thank you. In other news, Nigeria's election results are trickling out, but it could be days before a new president is announced. It's the tightest race since the end of military rule in 1999. Yusra is joining us now. Hi, Yusra. So there were 3 main candidates. How's it looking?
I mean, we are in Lagos, which is a key stronghold in the country. 7 million people have signed up to vote here. And one of the main contenders, Bola Ahmed Tinubu, is known as the godfather of Lagos. He was the former governor here, and he's running on the ticket of the ruling APC party. But he's actually losing to 61-year-old former banker Peter Obi here in Lagos, who's won 17 out of 20 local government authorities and is actually leading slightly in the popular vote. But it will still be a few days, obviously, until things are really clear. But again, it's an incredibly tight race. Things are moving in ways that are unexpected. Peter Obi has galvanized the youth vote. Many of the young people that we've met here have said that he is their guy. He is the one that will bring about change at a time where change is much needed. There have been issues with the economy that are hitting people in their day-to-day. There's been a massive cash shortage, fuel scarcity, but also really high unemployment among the youth that is actually really...
I think we might have lost her, but we're getting the point. We won't know who the president is in Nigeria for a few days to come. Of course, we'll update you as soon as we have more information on that. Meantime, Israeli settlers have torched Palestinian cars and homes in the northern West Bank after a Palestinian gunman killed 2 Israeli brothers. It's raised doubts about a meeting in Jordan where Israeli and Palestinian officials jointly pledged to de-escalate the latest surge in violence. Hamas, which governs the Gaza Strip, called the meetings worthless and condemned its rivals in the Palestinian Authority for taking part. The ex-husband and former in-laws of a Hong Kong model have been charged with her murder. Abby Choi's dismembered body was found on Friday. The 28-year-old's case has gripped the Chinese territory since her disappearance last week. California being battered by what the National Weather Service says is one of the strongest storms ever to hit the state. 45 inches of snow fell in the Big Bear Lake area in 72 hours. In Los Angeles, forecasters have warned of flash flooding and also mudslides. And this is a moment that a motorhome fell into the Santa Clara River just north of Los Angeles. The swollen river carved into an embankment near a holiday park and caused it to collapse. Speaking to friends in California over the weekend, they've had to move out of their house because it's so cold and they don't have any central heating. They've never checked it worked in 20 years before. There you go, that's how cold it is. Speaking to the Lib Dems leader, Sir Ed Davey, who is urging ministers to scrap the energy price cap rise. Next hour, the Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves will be here to talk about her boss growth mission. And at 8:20, I'll get Phil Rycroft's thoughts on the looming Northern Ireland trade deal. He was the permanent secretary at the Brexit department. Remember when it was oven ready? Now, the Conservative MP and member of the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee, Sir Robert Buckland, is here with us this morning. Hey, how are you? It's
Hello,
nice
Kate.
to see you, as always. Is this deal going to go ahead?
Well, it sounds like it. I mean, I'm hearing...
Been here before.
Well, we have many times, and I think a lot of us have got the scars on our back on Brexit. It does sound as if it is happening. If Ursula von der Leyen is coming over this afternoon, then it does look like that the British government and the EU have agreed a deal, which I think is really positive news for the people of Northern Ireland, because anything that helps to deal with the bureaucracy and the disruption that is caused to businesses by these checks between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, I think is a very positive step forward.
It's not a deal unless the DUP agree, though, is it?
Well, I very much hope that the DUP will approve what comes out of the package. I'm hearing that there are potential developments on VAT and state subsidies, which are big issues as well for the relationship between the EU and the UK. But I think now is the time for us to press ahead with much-needed change. I think that we need to think about citizens in Northern Ireland and their lives and the reality of life on the ground in Northern Ireland and work together for that change. And whilst it'd be great to have the DUP on board, I think now is the time for us to get on with those reforms.
From what you're saying, can we glean that the DUP is not all-powerful like it was previously?
Well, look, I'm sure that DUP MPs and MLAs themselves would not claim to be all-powerful. I think what they would say is that they are...
Managed to scupper deals before.
Well, I mean, look, we remember when, of course, they held the balance of power in that hung parliament back in 17. That isn't the case anymore. But it's not the case that they are being marginalised. And also there's a wider issue here about unionist opinion within Northern Ireland. There are many strands of opinion that support union with Great Britain, with the UK, but who might take a more pragmatic view, shall we say, of the need for some compromise here. You know, we mustn't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And I'm sure that this deal will probably have some unanswered questions and maybe not solve all the issues in one fell swoop. But it does sound as if it's going to be a big step forward. That means then we don't have to take this unilateral action here in the UK with the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill that's currently before Parliament.
It sounds as though the Prime Minister's already got the top off his Mont Blanc fountain pen, but surely it needs to go to a vote in the House of Commons.
Well, here's the thing. I think technically it probably doesn't, because I think this is...
That's not really the point, though, is it?
Well, I understand politics, Kay. I've been around a long time. I think if I were the government, I'd probably be making time for a debate and for some sort of vote that can be held by members. But I do think that as a matter of law, it is important to remember that we put into place mechanisms in the EU Withdrawal Act back in 2020 that allow for these things to have direct effect through that already established legislative pipeline. So let's not get too hung up about this. But the idea that somehow MPs aren't going to have their say is, I think, for the birds. I'm sure we're going to hear a lot of opinion in the next few days.
So you think there will be a vote?
Well, I think there'll be some sort of vote. I think...
Because the ERG will want to vote. People like Boris Johnson and Suella Braverman, who are agitating in the background, they will all want to vote. Yeah,
but the government is right to say that they've already established the statutory pipeline through which any treaties are enforced.
That's true, but what does that mean for the Prime Minister in
look,
real terms?
I think it means for the Prime Minister he's able to do his deal and actually act in the interest of the people of Northern Ireland. And I think that whilst Parliament is obviously hugely important in all of that, I think that ultimately, you know, the government has got to be in a position where it is able to make these international agreements and then make them stick. And I'm sure that the majority of the Conservative Party will want the Prime Minister to succeed.
I understand that, but the Prime Minister has to keep the troublemakers on side.
Well, yes, he does, but also this is about leadership. And I think when you are in these positions of leadership, taking some risks, taking difficult decisions, grasping nettles, if you like, is a really important part of what it is to be a leader. And I think the Prime Minister is demonstrating that at the moment. I very much hope that he succeeds. It will be a demonstration of his resolution and his ability to, under big pressure, make those big calls.
But you can only lead if you have the support of your backbenchers.
Well, I think the majority of backbenchers will rally round. I think that whilst it's important to hear the voices of everybody who, like me, has been deep in the weeds on all of this, I think ultimately, looking at the bigger picture, we've got to put ourselves in the shoes of the people of Northern Ireland. Remember that it is their interests that we need to serve, the interests of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, to make sure that that peace process isn't undermined by any damage to the north-south border. But at the same time, no damage to the east-west border, which is, of course, an important strand of that 1998 agreement.
OK, here come all the acronyms. The DUP saying 7 tests, including no border in the Irish Sea, no checks on goods between GB and I. And if they don't support what's going forward, then the ERG, another European Research Group, another acronym for you, they are not going to support it because they want the DUP to be happy. So where does that leave the Prime Minister?
Well, I think the 7 tests having been developed last year were an important moment for the DUP. I've yet to see, and I think all of us have yet to see the detail of that deal. It may well be the DUP keep their counsel.
It's border down the Irish Sea of some form, isn't
Well,
it?
I think it'll be a vast improvement on where we were if we have red and green lanes. I think the problem here, Kay, is that we have a unique situation in Northern Ireland. We have a peace process we've got to maintain. That north-south border must never be a hard border. And that does mean that the rules of the single market do start to blend in a rather unusual and perhaps inelegant way with the rules and the laws of the United Kingdom. There therefore needs to be a compromise. I think within those 7 tests, the DUP, I think, do understand that this is a unique position. And, we've now, in early 2023, we've moved on. I think the position that meant that the government was right back in June last year to bring forward its own unilateral legislation here in Parliament has changed. The fact we're having meaningful negotiations, the fact the EU themselves acknowledge problems with the protocol, I think was a big step forward. And that does mean that we're now in a place where we can normalise relations, which will have wider implications for the UK. We can start to do business on small boats, for example, if we can get this deal over the line.
What happened to it being an oven-ready deal and no border whatsoever in the Irish Sea? That's what a previous Conservative Prime Minister promised us.
Well, I would say that in the main, we got the absolute deal that we wanted. I think the protocol was always going to be a problem. I think that some of the practical effects of the protocol have now demonstrated real dislocation. Of course, not all of the protocol has even been brought into force yet, and I think that would be an even more problematic situation.
You need to be Einstein to realise it was going to be a problem.
Well, I don't think any of us were denying the fact that this was a complex and unique situation in Northern Ireland. But what I think it is encouraging to see is the government prepared to seize the initiative, get on with those meaningful negotiations, and now, hopefully today, we can see them bearing fruit.
So, how come, potentially, Rishi Sunak can get this over the line and Boris Johnson couldn't?
Well, look, that
was a big sigh before you answered this question.
I'm not in the room, Kay. I'm not in the room. I don't have the advantage this time of being in the rooms where decisions are made or information is passed on. What I would say is that I think this Prime Minister has been able to create a relationship of trust. I think
it's about personalities.
Well, sometimes politics is, and this isn't a reflection on previous Prime Ministers particularly. If you get on well with people and win their trust, then I think in all our experiences, more business can be done. And I think the relationship with the French president has probably improved. I think there is that willingness.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I think I haven't been in a room with either of them together, but I understand that there is a good personal chemistry and that the relationship is a healthy one. That's really important if we are to make progress on things like small boats, Kay. I think it's vital for the interests of the UK at this time of economic pressure that we are able to show the world that we are capable of making deals and agreements like the one I hope will emerge this week. And I think that is good, not just for Northern Ireland, but also good for Britain's reputation in the world, our relationship with the United States, and indeed the wider position of Britain. So that's why I'm willing the Prime Minister on, and I very much hope that a deal can be reached.
So, just to clarify, we've got a Conservative Prime Minister who is finally listening to what the European Union has to say.
Well, I think they're listening to us as well. I think this time last year, the Commission and indeed other governments, the Irish government, weren't really in a position where they were prepared to admit that there was a problem with the protocol. That changed. We heard much more positive noises from the Irish government, and the EU themselves then showed a willingness to share data and to come to the negotiating table for those formal talks. I think both sides have shown a willingness to compromise and to come to a sensible agreement, and that's why I think we should be welcoming the news today.
And just to clarify, why did we sign a deal if we thought that it wasn't the right deal?
Well, if you remember back in 2019, I think we were in a position where we really needed to get a deal over the line. I think that in the main, I think that deal was an extremely sensible one for the United Kingdom. We got Brexit done in early 2020. We created that transition period. We got a trade agreement that indeed in many elements was a deeper trade agreement than perhaps people had originally thought. I'd love to go further. I'd like to see more subjects covered, like financial services, for example, in the future. But I do, remembering our position at the time, I think it was very important that we got a deal with the EU and managed to keep to that timetable, which, bearing in mind the previous frustrations that we'd seen about Brexit, was indeed an achievement of Boris Johnson.
How can you say we got Brexit done when we're where we are today?
Well, I think the very fact of Brexit has been done. But here's the thing, Kay. I think our relationship with the EU will be a continuing negotiation. They're geographically next door to us. We have a lot of trade and relationships in common between them. We will continue to talk bilaterally with the EU. And frankly, that's what I'd want to see. I think the idea that somehow we shut up shop and say, well, thank you very much, we're not going to be talking to you anymore, is, I think, rather a dangerous concept. I want to see more meaningful discussions with the EU in future so that we can enjoy that healthy bilateral relationship outside of the institutions of Brussels.
Sir Robert, it's always great to see you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Kate.
Much appreciated. Thank you. Quick look at the weather for you now here on Sky.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Next few days will be largely dry and settled, but it's going to be chilly with widespread overnight frost.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Sci-fi action-adventure film Everything, Everywhere, All at Once has set a new record at this year's Screen Actors Guild Awards, scooping up 4 major trophies. They included Best Ensemble in a Motion Picture and Best Female Actor for Michelle Yeoh. Brendan Fraser also had a good night, winning Outstanding Actor in a Film for his role in The Whale. And the cast of HBO's immensely popular The White Lotus won Best Ensemble in a Drama Series, with Jennifer Coolidge taking Outstanding Female Actress in a Drama Series. We'll have more on those awards later on this hour. Now, people living in a picturesque Cornish town have deployed their musical talents in an effort to recruit a new GP.
It's a special place to live. If too much you want to give, you can negotiate your terms. If you'll keep us free of germs from
More than 500 people living in the town played a part in the music video. It shows off the town's charms in what the community admits is an increasingly desperate attempt to bring in a new doctor, as traditional adverts have failed. Still to come, some beautiful shots from last night. Telling you about some fantastic pictures, weren't we, before the break? Stargazers were treated to a rare sighting across the sky last night as the Northern Lights were visible across much of the UK. Also known as the Aurora Borealis, these spectacular displays are usually only seen in the Arctic Circle, but this was the view from Ayr Beach in Scotland. Amazing. It's caused by a combination of different gases and the effects of the Earth's magnetic field that make up the colours and wave patterns. But you knew that, didn't you? This was from County Durham. Spectacular curtain of red and green filling the skies there. And remarkably, the display was seen as far south as Oxford. As you can see from these pictures, good news for those who missed it. The Met Office say there'll be more of it this evening. Though, if you've ever tried to chase the Northern Lights, you'll know that they are incredibly unpredictable. Top stories for you this morning. Rishi Sunak is preparing for final talks with EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen on the Northern Ireland Protocol. Conservative MP Sir Robert Buckland predicted on this programme that any agreement would be subject to a vote in the House of Commons. Supermarket bosses have been called to a meeting with Food Minister Mark Spencer, who will tell them to get the shelves stocked. Ofgem expected to announce a drop in its energy price caps at 9 o'clock, but it won't mean lower bills for households. Final Brexit talks are due to take place with a deal expected today, which could cut red tape and make trade easier across the Irish Sea. Earlier, I spoke to Sir Robert Buckland, member of the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee.
I think now is the time for us to press ahead with much-needed change. I think that we need to think about citizens in Northern Ireland and their lives and the reality of life on the ground in Northern Ireland and work together for that change. And whilst it'd be great to have the DUP on board, I think now is the time for us to get on with those reforms.
We'll have more on that throughout the morning. Let's turn now to another big challenge for the government. Should we energy bills? Ofgem will announce a drop in its energy price cap at 9 o'clock, but households are still expecting higher bills from April. Carly Newman is a single mum with a young son. Hey, Carly, it's good to see you. Thanks for joining us. Tell us about the impact that energy prices have had on you.
This winter we've obviously seen the increase like everyone else. I've also had quite a bit of like mold and damp, so I've had to have a dehumidifier on as well as the heating, so that's been very expensive. And it's still cold, right? So I'm thinking the bills are going to continue to stay at this price for a while, but they're obviously likely to increase over the next month or so.
Tell us what the last year has been like for you, though. We can see the little one is there with you. Yeah. Obviously, keeping the house warm, you're talking about the mould there, keeping the house warm has been a big challenge for you. The energy price guarantee ends in April and the energy bill support scheme also scaled back in April. So how's that going to impact on you?
Yeah, a lot. And unfortunate that they coincide at the same time. I think government have a habit of bad timing like this. And that support's obviously been very useful to me. It has helped with my bills when they've come in quite eye-wateringly. At least you know that discount is, sorry, am I boring you? Is applied. So actually that has been quite helpful. And for that, I'm quite worried about that going, because it does make a difference to me and what I'm able to do. I think it will just, like many people, see energy debts increasing.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at how much Centrica, who own British Gas, made in profits, £3.3 billion last year, and then look at Shell, they made profits of £32.2 billion. How does that make you feel when you're worrying about whether to put the heating on or not?
Yeah, it just feels it feels quite criminal, really. And I think I've been saying it for a while. I don't understand how it's still allowed to happen. My understanding is also that the cost of I don't understand enough about how it works, but the overall wholesale cost has gone down. So energy companies are the fuel isn't expensive, the energy isn't expensive for them to buy. So I'm not sure why then the cap is changing and it isn't being reflected onto us.
Yeah, the government so far has had a windfall tax on gas and oil companies, and they're sort of shying away from anything more than that at this stage. What would you say?
I'll just say I don't really understand how it's allowed to continue. How are these companies making such huge profits when lots and lots of families are struggling? Lots and lots of families are going into debt that, with energy companies, all debt is scary to have, but particularly, with energy companies having that sort of like threatening over you that energy companies can take away your energy supply at any moment, particularly now when it's really cold, and that's affecting lots of people, people that have maybe never been in debt before. How is that like justifiable? How is that being allowed?
What's he saying?
He's saying he's cold, but he's wearing very fleecy pajamas.
Yeah. Okay, look after your mum. Bye. See you. Thanks very much. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Village in Norfolk has seen its beach erode by 3 metres in just 2 days, leaving houses at risk of collapse. Lifeboat access to Hemsby has been cut off, with the beach expected to be closed for the foreseeable future. Adele has more.
A deceiving calm as the edge of a community crumbles into the sea. Daniel runs the lifeboat service here, now out of action, and the beach is closed after 2 nights of high winds and tides tore into the coast.
But it just seems there's no matter of urgency to anything along this coastline.
And how urgent is it?
Oh, it's urgent. To me, I've said this needs doing now, not in 2 years' time. This should have been done 5 years ago. We've lost so much of this coastline.
Homes are at risk too. A quarter of Mary's back garden's been lost to the sea.
We was told to expect to move out, but we took our chances. If it carries on, I don't know how long. I don't know. It depends on who helps and who doesn't. We just need someone to help us.
In 30 years, Hemsby Beach has lost around 100 metres. A telegraph pole now teeters on the edge.
The geology of some areas makes them more vulnerable than others. Here on the east coast of England, it's particularly at risk because it's made up of a mixture of soft clay and sand, which is less resistant than the harder rock found over in the west. Now, it's an inevitability. Erosion has always happened, but what's different is the process is accelerating, and many believe that that is down to climate change.
The amount of government money allocated to coastal erosion's risen, but there's a feeling action isn't in step with the urgency of a changing landscape.
We have sea levels that are rising faster now because of global warming, and that means that we will see more of this kind of thing happening in the future. But I would emphasise that this is as much a problem with a communication problem, a planning problem, a question of having honest conversations in communities so that people understand what's going on.
Vulnerable coastal areas like this one want immediate action and an acceptance we can't turn the tide of erosion. Adele Robinson, Sky News, Norfolk.
So Ed Davies here with us to talk about all sorts of things, but primarily, of course, the Northern Ireland Protocol. What would you like to see in any deal?
Well, I want to make sure we sort out the trading relationships. Liberal Democrats want to make sure there is a deal because that would be good for Northern Ireland, it would be good for the whole of the UK economy. The government's failure to deliver a deal for months, years now, has been a real break on economic success. So if the deal makes sense, Liberal Democrats will back it.
And what does making sense look like to the Liberal Democrats?
Well, we need to make sure that the barriers to trade are got rid of, that there is a deal that all parties can sign up to. We talk to parties in Northern Ireland a lot to make sure we're getting the grassroots opinion from businesses and people in Northern Ireland. And our sister party, the Alliance, are very keen on a deal. We take that into huge consideration because they and the people they represent are the most affected by it. So we'll be listening to people in Northern Ireland, but we also need to take account of British business as well.
Sure. I mean, the Alliance Party and the DUP, very different views on what should be in this deal. The DUP saying they don't want any border in the Irish Sea. Brexit means there has to be a border somewhere.
Well, indeed. That is the logic of Brexit. And the danger is that if we don't sort this out, the level of investment in Northern Ireland, the investment in our own country, will just go down and down and down. And let's face it, our economy is in a mess at the moment. We're the bottom of the league for growth, I regret to say, because of this government's failed economic policies. And that's bad for people. It's part of the reason why people are finding it so hard to make ends meet.
I know, but you're taking me away from my point this morning, if I may, Sir Ed, and that is what is going to happen with the DUP primarily, and thus the ERG, European Research Group. They do not want a border in the Irish Sea. What we're being told is that there will be, albeit a soft border, but there will be a border in the Irish Sea.
Well, you're absolutely right. The DUP and many Conservative backbenchers have been quite ideological about this. They're not being pragmatic. And I think when you listen to business people and to the other representatives in Northern Ireland, they want a pragmatic solution. They want to move on. It seems the Conservative Party is just incapable of doing that. And that's very damaging to our reputation. It's very damaging for our economy. So I hope there can be agreement with the DUP and the ERG from the Conservatives coming on board. We'll see if Rishi Sunak has managed that. What he can know is he puts a reasonable deal on the table. Liberal Democrat MPs will support that, even if his Conservative supposed colleagues vote against him.
He might not get a say in it. He doesn't need to take it to Parliament.
He doesn't absolutely need to in terms of constitution, but I think politically he needs to. I think most MPs, if not all MPs, and certainly voters, would think it'd be extraordinary for him to do this huge deal and not to allow the elected representatives, the people's representatives, to have a say.
How do you think he's managed to get this far with the European Union and people like Liz Truss and Boris Johnson have not?
Well, we'll see. When he puts forward the deal, we'll be scrutinising it line by line. Of course, that's our job. I just hope he has found some pragmatic way forward. It's so damaging not to have this deal. And sometimes people will think, well, it doesn't really matter, it's Northern Ireland. It does matter, not just to the people of Northern Ireland, but to our ability to move on in our relationship with Europe. That's been very damaging, this impasse over Northern Ireland. It's prevented us enabling many of our businesses to have better entry into the European economy. And that's hampering our wider success as an economy. So we really need a deal. We need it soon. And the failure of the Conservatives, whether it's been Johnson, Truss and now Sunak to deliver that, has been a real failure of government.
Sir Robert Buckland, Conservative, previous Cabinet Secretary, now on the Northern Ireland Select Committee, saying to a certain level, Rishi Sunak has managed to get further than the other two because of personality politics.
Quite possibly, and to be honest, that's up to the Conservatives. There seems to be a battle between personalities in the Conservatives, and the reason why I think that's very reprehensible and wrong is there are millions of families and pensioners out there who are suffering with the cost of living, suffering with energy bills, and Liberal Democrats keep arguing the government should focus on the issues that matter to people, whether it's the cost of living and energy bills, whether it's the NHS crisis, and the government keeps taking its eye off the ball and seem completely out of touch with the real problems that people are facing.
To that end, you are suggesting a bonanza bonus. What's that all about?
Well, there's a bonanza bonus being enjoyed by the bosses of the oil and gas companies, and we think that should be taxed, along with the windfall tax on the profits of energy.
So the flip side of the windfall tax, OK.
Yeah, because, we need more help for people struggling with energy bills. The government at the moment, despite millions of people struggling, are proposing to increase people's energy bills by another £500 this April. In my constituency, we've got people who can't afford their rent. We're seeing a large increase in the numbers of people going to food banks. That's the reality, and yet the government are going to increase the cost of living. What Liberal Democrats are saying is, no, we actually should be cutting the energy bills for people.
No, they're not increasing the bills by £500. What they're doing is taking away a temporary support structure that was in place, no?
Well, the support structure called the Energy Price Guarantee is currently £2,500, which means the average household will pay only £2,500, only, huge amount. Mm-hmm. The Conservatives are proposing, despite this cost of living emergency, to increase it to £3,000. Some people will actually see their energy bills go up by £900 with this Conservative package. So what Liberal Democrats are saying is, no, use the money that you have saved, government, that you had put aside for this support, but keep it there. And if you do, and you have a proper windfall tax, you can afford both to cut everyone's energy bills by a lot by reducing the energy price guarantee and give more money to businesses who are struggling and indeed the least well off. So we have a complete package, properly funded, completely affordable, which would cut inflation and boost growth. And
so
I think
you support Liz Truss's economics after all, then?
No. Liz Truss's economics were to give the better off a lot more money. We're not doing that. Our money will be targeted at the least well off.
And support with our energy bills?
Well, her scheme was just not affordable because you saw the huge increase in borrowing. What our fund is affordable. Our proposals are affordable because we use the money that Jeremy Hunt's put aside, but he wants to squirrel it away in the Treasury. We're saying keep it there to help people with their energy bills.
Talk to me about Dominic Raab. He says that if he is found guilty as far as bullying claims are concerned, then he will resign.
I think he should. if he's found guilty. We all wait the report. I think we've all been shocked by the number of complaints, but I think it's only fair to see what the investigation finds.
Because previously you had suggested, had you not, that he should step aside until the report...
Yeah, and I still think that. I think it's been quite wrong that as Justice Secretary, above all, Justice Secretary, he's been serving there despite these huge number of complaints. I think in any other walk of life, people would have had to step down during the investigation. I think it's been wrong that he's been in his post during this very serious investigation.
And just before I let you go, how do you think the Lib Dems are going to get on in Scotland now that Nicola Sturgeon is stepping aside?
Well, you know, Nicola Sturgeon, I think, has admirers from across the parties. She was the first woman First Minister in Scotland. And while I and the Liberal Democrats disagree with her on many, many issues, one couldn't help admire the fact that she got to where she was. The implications, I think, though, for the Liberal Democrats are pretty positive. We're finding on the doorstep that not just because Nicola Sturgeon's stood down, but the SNP's failures in government in Holyrood more generally, a lot of support is coming to us in places like Edinburgh, in places like the Highlands and Islands. We're seeing a big uptake in support for the Liberal Democrats coming from former SNP supporters and former Conservative supporters.
OK. Are you a moviegoer?
A moviegoer. Well, during the short recess, I went to see Puss in Boots: The Last Wish with my daughter.
How was it?
It was great fun. She really enjoyed it.
Good. Apparently, the one to watch is Everything, Everywhere, All at Once.
Yeah, no, I saw that. Yeah. I was going to go. I'm not sure I'll take my daughter to see it, though.
I wouldn't. It's good to see you, as always. Thanks very much indeed. Let's talk about it in more detail, though, should we? Award-winning film producer Walter Mirisch. We'll talk about that first, and then I'm going to tell you about the Saga Awards from last night, which is sort of a precursor to the Oscars, if you will. Anyway, as I was telling you, he's been appraised as a true visionary and industry leader after his death at the age of 101.
Like to be in America, okay by me in America, everything free in America.
For a small fee in America.
Famous for classics like West Side Story and Some Like It Hot, he won the Best Picture Oscar for 1967's In the Heat of the Night. The Academy announced Mirisch's death, saying his passion for filmmaking never wavered. As promised, let's talk about the Saga Awards now. Ashanti Omkar is here to talk about last night's Screen Actors Guild Awards. Hi, it's good to see you. Thanks for joining us on the programme. So the movie I was just talking to Sir Ed about, Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. Does it deserve all the awards?
Absolutely, 100%. I am beaming because I stayed up actually to watch the ceremony, and the wins just feel so good to me, especially with Michelle Yeoh being the first Asian woman to win at the SAG Awards, and Ki Hui Kwan, who also has won for this film, plus this film itself winning, feels so good for Representation Matters.
Jamie Lee Curtis, finally nominated for an Academy Award. She won for Best Supporting Actress last night.
She did indeed. And her speech just also, you know, it had lots of emotions for me. Not only did she look great in that red outfit, she talked about nepotism. She talked about how hard she's worked. Everything she said on stage felt great. And she also got the whole crowd chanting for Michelle Yeoh, which also was just really magnificent.
Yeah. Tell me about White Lotus. I've loved White Lotus.
Oh gosh, for this winning outstanding performance in an ensemble series, that actually is glorious because it is such a tough production to make. And every time it keeps winning the awards because it has some amazing talent in it. And Jennifer Coolidge, she has been winning these awards. It's great to see that her time has come. And for this as an ensemble to win just is fantastic.
Now, Top Gun Maverick, one of the top grossing movies of last year. How come movies like that don't get nominated?
You know what? It is a pet peeve of mine, I'll be honest, because action movies are the ones that get people into cinemas. Superhero movies get people into cinemas. People are contributing, the fans are contributing to the box office. And a lot of the time, the awards voters are slightly snooty about these. And it does bug me because I am a Critics' Choice voter. And there's a Critics' Choice Super Awards where you have, action, horror, all these genres that kind of get under the line of these big award ceremonies. And it's just wonderful to see this, because this stunt ensemble that Tom Cruise put together with this film Top Gun Maverick literally got the people into the cinemas. There wasn't CGI. He did this with a rigorous process. He made sure he could dunk these people underwater to make sure they could actually do these roles. Everything that they did to make this film was so magnificent. I'm really glad that it has had a chance in the spotlight. And I really hope that this changes as things go along, because they're working really hard on these movies and they're not getting as acknowledged as they should be.
Well, they get paid a lot of money, though, don't they? So I suppose that's some acknowledgement for some. Ashanti, just before I let you go, looking over the horizon to the Oscars, any predictions?
Oh, I have a feeling that Angela Bassett might win at the Oscars. And I have a feeling Everything Everywhere All at Once will do very well again. And Michelle Yeoh, I feel, has that chance now that she has won the SAG Award, because it was a little kind of dicey between her and Cate Blanchett this time around. But with her winning at the SAG, I have a feeling the Oscars will also be a clean sweep for her.
OK, it's good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Everything Everywhere All at Once is the one that is predicted to do incredibly well at the Oscars. Coming up in the next hour, we're going to be talking about the Northern Ireland Protocol. What does that actually mean to you? What will it mean for the Prime Minister? Will he take it to a vote in the House of Commons? If he doesn't, what impact will that have on his future career? What about a border in the Irish Sea? We were told by a previous Prime Minister that that was never, ever, ever going to happen under a Conservative government. It looks as though potentially a soft border down the Irish Sea is now very much on the cards. What does Labour think of all that? We'll tell you in just a few moments' time. Do stay tuned our way.